Hey guys, welcome back to r/entitled_people. In this story, a psycho Karen at a public beach stole my prosthetic arm and gave it to her entitled brats to play with. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. And the first one is titled Injustice with Entitled Karen. So I am disabled and I use a walker. I have seasonal tickets to a local minor league baseball team and I sit in an ADA section at the ballpark. It is on the concourse, so I don't have to navigate steps to and from the restroom, concessions, etc. I have the same seat for every game of the season. It's at the end of the row and there's space for me to put my folded walker, it folds pretty small, and room for me to get in and out even when the wheelchair spaces on the other side of my seat are occupied. Season ticket holders are given a card that the ticket taker scans on the way in. Okay, so one day last week I was there sitting in my seat drinking my beer, waiting for the game to start when this large group comes along. A few developmentally disabled adults and a lot of non-disabled companions. The row I sit in has 10 seats, 4 of them are actually wheelchair spaces, the 4 wheelchair spaces are taken by those who need them. That leaves 5 regular seats as the one I'm sitting in does not count here. So this able-bodied woman who appeared to be the leader of this group came over to me and told me to move because I was not ticketed for the seat that her group had the whole row, so supposedly I had to move. I told her she was mistaken and showed her my season ticket card that has the section, row and seat number printed right there on it. She still wouldn't believe me and kept demanding that I move. I was about to go and fetch a staff member to resolve the issue when one came over. I have been a season ticket holder at this place since 2011 and I've had this particular seat for 2 years now. Almost everybody who works there knows me, so this was a battle that Entitled Karen could never hope to win. So then the staff member guy tells Entitled Karen to leave me alone, that I'm ticketed for that seat and don't have to move, and showed her where the seats her group was ticketed for are. They did have my whole row except for my seat, but only 5 of the non-disabled people could sit in the row, the other 4 were wheelchairs. The rest of them had seats in the regular seating bowl, same section, but right in front of the concourse row. The ADA row is for actual disabled people and a limited number of companions, not for all the non-disabled people in a large group. So Entitled Karen relents and leaves me alone, sort of. She's actually complaining loudly to her friends that I should have been considerate and given up my seat to her, but I ignored her. But wait, there's even more. There's a pile of folding chairs in the alcove of the restrooms behind this row, and these people found them and decided to use them to make their own row behind me because they all wanted to sit together. Since both the wheelchair spaces to the left of me were occupied, the only access I had in and out was a space about 2 feet wide. Fine, I can do that. Then another person with a folding chair came along and tried to block off that little space, so I would have no way to get out. I turned around and told them no, and they backed off. The game was sold out, so there were no other seats for me to move to, just to get away from them. I hope I never have to see them again. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I can instantly see that these are inconsiderate douchebags that have no regards for other people. I just hate people like this, honestly. Props to OP for dealing with them though. Anyway, the next one is from r/Ripestories and it's titled Crazy Racist Neighbor Finally Got Her Comeuppance. Posted by NY Boricua on r/Ripestories. So I listened to a Ripe story today about a crazy racist neighbor and was about to post a story in the comments about my experience with a crazy Karen neighbor too. Anyway, I have lived in my house for 23 years. About 3 years after we moved in, a family moved into the house next door. I should mention this as it is essential for the story. While my husband is 100% Northern European, I am Native American, Hispanic and African. And by the way, Ripe Stars, just to quickly interject if you don't mind, as a non-American, I am always fascinated by the mix of ethnicities people in America apparently have. Native American, Hispanic and African, that's not something I would have assumed people could have. Or be, I guess. Anyway, really fascinating for an outsider. So the women living in the new house dropped by one day to say hello to my husband as he was outside. She mentioned that our lawn and garden looked great and asked if his gardener had extra time to help her. My husband was perplexed because I did all our garden and lawn care. He told her that she must be mistaken as the only person who works in our yard is his wife. She said, oh, maybe she had a friend helping her and I got confused. She left, and when I got home my husband told me the story, so I decided I should introduce myself. That night I baked a batch of wild berry muffins using the wild berries on my property and went to the new neighbor the following day. After ringing the bell, she opened the door and looked at me. She made a face like she smelled something bad and said, "What do you want?" I explained who I was and where I lived and that I wanted to welcome her to the neighborhood. She looked at me, then the muffins, and yelled to her husband, "Oh great, we have one of them living next door." And I suppose one of them means a normal human being that introduces herself in a friendly manner. Clearly that is not something that Karens are familiar with. Anyway, her husband came over, introduced himself with a big smile and thanked me for the muffins. As he was about to take them, she grabbed them and pushed them back at me, saying she had diabetes and couldn't eat sugar. Her husband looked appalled as she slammed the door in my face. I was bewildered by the interaction, but my family was happy to enjoy the muffins. Things went downhill after that. The first incident was when I was in the pool with my 3-year-old twins. They were toddlers, so of course they were squealing and having fun, but the next thing I knew, the police were walking around my backyard because someone called them, stating that my children were screaming in the backyard and being beaten. It was obvious to them as they walked towards the back and saw the kids were in the pool having fun that it was a misunderstanding. But I had my suspicions on who made the call. 2 days later the police were back at my house because I was screaming at my kids and the caller was worried they were in danger. Please note that I've never screamed or hit my kids in their entire life. Police get there and I'm home alone because the kids are out with my husband. I do let them come in and see that I was alone a month later, and guess what? The police are back at my door. Apparently this time my husband was the one beating me and the kids. The only problem was that my husband was in Germany on a business trip. By this point I was fed up and asked if I could file a complaint because I knew who was making the false calls. They told me to go to the police station to file. Well, I never got a chance to because the following morning was the worst and craziest situation. Here is why. The following morning an Amber Alert went out in our county for a 4-year-old boy missing. Now I will say the little boy that was missing did resemble my son a little bit, only the missing boy's eyes were green and my son's were brown. Well, all of a sudden there are 8 cop cars in my driveway with guns drawn, telling me someone made a report that they saw me coming into my house with the missing boy. They entered my home and started asking my son questions, but of course as soon as they saw my son, they knew it was not a little boy. They did comb my home though. After they realized it was a false sighting, I spoke with the mayor who was at my house too. I explained all the other false calls placed against me and that I believed my crazy and racist neighbor was making all these false allegations against me. She told me that she would look into it, and well, 3 days later, my neighbor was arrested for filing false police reports, wasting police resources and interfering with an Amber Alert. Apparently, I was not her only victim. She had been making similar 911 calls to the Korean family that lived in the house on the other side of hers. She did even go in front of a judge and was found guilty on all 3 counts. It was her first offense, so she did not get jail time. She was sentenced to 2 years probation and a whopping $10,000 fine. We got together with the other neighbor she harassed and sued her for the trauma she put us through, especially to our children. That was settled out of court. She moved out not long after, but her husband stayed and they divorced. He is a great guy and couldn't stop apologizing for his crazy racist wife. He traveled a lot for work and didn't realize what his wife had been doing. They'd been married 3 years before the divorce. This was 20 years ago and we are great friends with him and the fantastic woman he married 15 years ago. I do wonder if his ex-wife blew her lid when she found out that he married an American-born Chinese woman. I don't know what happened to his ex-wife and frankly, I don't care. Oh, and by the way, the 4-year-old boy from the Amber Alert was found safe and sound. His mother had lost custody and she picked him up from daycare one day and tried to flee with him. They said the incident at my house caused the police to lose precious time, but they were found 5 hours later. And yeah, Ripestories, I gotta say, that was a crazy story. What an awful neighbor, and props to OP for handling the situation so perfectly. This is really next level. I mean, when an Amber Alert goes out, you should not waste the time of the police. There should be even more severe consequences for this, if you ask me. Either way, thank you so much for posting your stories on r/Ripestories. You can be sure that if it is a good story, sooner or later I will read it in a video. Either way, let's move on to the title story, which is titled titled Psycho Karen Pulls Out My Prosthetic Arm at a Beach. For some background, I lost my arm a few years ago in a motorbike accident. It was devastating, of course, but after hours and hours of rehabilitation, I've gotten used to using a prosthetic arm. It was very expensive as I went with a top-of-the-range model that has incredible high-tech attributes. I had some savings and decided spending them on said arm as my mental health really took a big hit from losing my real arm. I think a lot of people would do the same. Anyway, expensive arm and definitely not a toy. You'll see why I feel the need to emphasize that later. I've never had many issues with other people in my new arm. Kids are often just curious and think it's cool as it looks like something out of Transformers. And if I didn't want looks and curious kids, I would have bought an arm that blends into my skin, not the futuristic cyber piece I went with. So anyway, this situation has been the first time I've ran into any issues regarding my disability. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was lounging on the beach close to my home. It was warm out and I just thought it would be lovely to sit under a parasol and read my book, which is exactly what I did until in my peripherals I saw a lady walking over. I did not pay her too much mind as she could have been walking past, but when she stopped right in front of me, I of course looked up. "What happened with your arm?" the woman asks, quite rudely if I had to say so. She was standing there with two kids who were staring at my arm with the usual fascination kids have, but the woman just looked offended if that was even possible. Well, I lost it in an accident," I said with a tight-lipped smile and tried to go back to my reading. "I don't really believe you, but anyway," she replied with an eye roll, holding out her hand. I stared at her in confusion and she just kept staring back expectantly. "Give it to me," she sighed. What? What on earth was happening? "My boys wanna play with it," she replied, looking at me like I was stupid. "You're joking, right?" I asked. I looked around, half expecting to see some camera set up and the whole thing was a prank or something. "Let us play with the toy," one of the boys exclaimed, stomping his foot. He looked to be around 10, way too old to be so rude to strangers. "I'm sorry, but no, this is not a toy." "Excuse me? Don't be so rude to my son. Now let them play with it just for a couple minutes." The woman continued, still with her hand outstretched. I sat there in shock. Was I dreaming? There was no way this was a real conversation I was having. Unless it was. I told them no again, and the other son, this one a few years younger than the other, kicked off, claiming it was unfair that I get it all the time or something. The mother didn't say anything, looking at me as if siding with her son. "Look, this is not a toy, you're not getting it. Now leave me alone," I stated, waving my real hand to shoo them away. "How rude! Hand it over!" "No. Why not? I've explained multiple times already. This is not a toy, it's my arm." Yeah, right. It must be some fancy prop or something. You don't need it. It just attaches over your real arm." I lifted up my fake arm to my eyes, looking at her through the gaps in the metal. It's been a while, but I don't remember my arm being see-through or something. She didn't like that response, staring at me as she got redder in the face. Her sons were also staring at me like I just killed their pet dog. "Hand it over," the woman exclaimed, attracting the attention of people nearby. "No," I said slowly, causing her youngest to burst into tears. This got us even more attention, just great, because I'm sure from the angle of everywhere else, it looked like I'd caused a child to cry and was now berating their mother. I need this prosthetic to function on a daily basis. I really cannot just hand it over for them to play with. It's not a toy. "Liar," the woman screamed. "Stop being so selfish and hoarding this toy all to yourself. You're way too old to be playing with such objects. Is it so difficult to share at your big age?" She then had the nerve to laugh at me too. I couldn't believe it. How did she not believe me? Or did she believe me and still think it was perfectly acceptable to demand I hand over my arm? I'm asking you to leave me alone. Your behavior is extremely inappropriate and I'm just trying to have a nice relaxing day and I owe you nothing. I stated, really sick of the whole situation at this point. She screamed back at me, more of the same spiel, that I'm selfish, etc. I ignored her and carried on reading my book, hoping they would get the hint and leave me alone. They stood there for a few minutes in silence. It was rather uncomfortable, but I'd much rather that silence than what happened next. In a matter of seconds, the woman had lunged forward and grabbed a hold of my prosthetic arm with both hands, yanking it full force until it came off. Now my prosthetic arm clicks into place with a few screws. It's not designed to come off just by pulling it, so as she pulled off my arm, she also pulled on the screws and other bits of metal that are in the remaining part of my physical arm. Translation, it really hurt and tore my skin where the screws connect. As I cried out in agony, she handed the arm to her sons hands and then ran off down to the water with it. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I screamed as I clutched at my nub. It was not a crazy injury, but I could tell the screws were out of place slightly and the tears in my skin were fairly deep. She stood in slight shock at the damage she had caused, seeing the blood forming, before turning around and walking after her sons. I felt humiliated and violated. People around were staring and whispering, and the physical pain did not help either. A few strangers came over to see if I was okay, and I asked one of them to call the police. Another went over and told the lifeguard what had happened, who radioed for backup. Before the police could arrive, I saw a team of security arrive from a beach hut and run after the woman and her kids. They questioned the woman before forcefully yanking my arm from one of the boys and detaining the woman who was trying to fight back. The police arrived and joined the fiasco, putting the woman in handcuffs and hauling her away from the beach. Other officers escorted the children after her. Finally, one approached me and got me to give my statement and account of what happened. While the woman was driven off in one direction, another officer drove me to the hospital where I got stitches for my arm and had my screws realigned. I did not bother giving my insurance details. I wanted this bill to go straight to the woman. As for my prosthetic, it had a devastating amount of water damage and was damaged severely in general. I pressed charges obviously and was taken to the police station where I heard the woman arguing with the cops. She was still claiming that it was nothing more than a toy, that neither she nor her children did anything wrong. "You did this on purpose," she screamed as she saw me walking past and into another room to give a more official statement. I ignored her, of course, and just carried on walking. She ended up getting arrested for theft and assault, as well as getting a very hefty bill for both a new arm for myself and the hospital bill too. I asked about the children and they were placed with their father, who unsurprisingly had separated from this woman. And yeah, Ripe Stars, don't you just love it when Karens get what they deserve? If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like the video and maybe post some star emojis in the comments. Thank you so much, and now let's move on to the next story, which you don't want to miss. It is titled Dad versus the Welfare Office. Posted by user Medium Savings 4968 on r/Ripestories. So this story goes back to the early 80s. Before I begin, my parents were on welfare and it helped them so much. Their social workers worked hard for them to keep helping them. This story is not in any way attacking the welfare office, its workers, or anyone on welfare. Some context, not sure how it works in other states, but here in California, when you apply for and continue to apply for welfare, for example food stamps, Medicaid, etc., you need to declare all financial accounts in your control and all money available at your disposal. This goes into the calculation to show you qualify or keep qualifying. I'll also note mom and dad are both Hispanic. In the early 80s, my father and mother, early in their marriage, had been on welfare for a few years. They were barely scraping by but working hard to get off it. My father finally gets a job for a local publication company. There's another story here on Reddit for how that ended. Now dad's hours fluctuate, which took him on and off food stamps for the time. During that time, the local bank, we will call Bank A, was acquired by a larger brand bank we will call Bank B. Mom and dad's account numbers stayed the same, the physical address stayed the same, everything stayed the same except the bank's name. So my father, some months later, gets a call from his social worker asking if mom and dad can pop into the office for a few minutes, talk, as something had come up. Something that could affect their welfare status. Mom and dad arrive, they wait 20 minutes and then are brought into the room with social worker SW. The following conversation occurs. Social worker: Mr. Dad, are you aware that you are to report all funds available to your person? Are you also aware by not doing so it may constitute a crime? Dad puzzled: yes. What's that have to do with? Dad gets cut off. Social worker: Mr. Dad, are you aware to report all funds available to your person? Are you also aware by not doing so it may constitute a crime? Dad again: yes. She then puts a document to sign in front of my father and mother. SW, please sign here and here to show that you are both aware of your rights and aware of the rule. Dad signs with mom. The social worker exits the room. She motions for 3 men, 2 in suits, one's a cop, to come nearby. SW, can you please explain why you have 2 secret bank accounts? The social worker grabs a folder and dumps 2 documents. My father, puzzled, befuddled and confused, looks over the documents. banks. The two documents have two differing banks on them, but the same physical address of the bank and the same account numbers. My mother scowls as she had realized first what's going on. Dad was clueless for the moment. For those clueless themselves, the lady was accusing my parents of welfare fraud, a punishable and criminal offense. SW, I investigated a follow-up with your bank account to confirm the details. These men will need to speak to you about what may be following. Mom whispers her thoughts to Dad and informs him what they are insinuating. Mom gives Dad permission to go Karen mode on them. Dad, you have some frickin' nerve to accuse me of a crime. We're just trying to live. I'm surprised my government is treating me like this, but more important, I'm surprised they did do a thorough job. SW, sir, there's no need to be rude and use language like that. These men and me are only trying to… Dad, then how about this? Can I borrow a highlighter? SW, well, I don't see how that's gonna change. My dad, can I borrow the highlighter on your desk for a moment? I want to point something out before you promptly arrest me for no reason and I'll have to sue you. SW looks at the two guys in suits. They raise their shoulders in the I don't know way. SW, fine. The woman angrily hands my father the highlighter. Dad highlights 4 lines on 2 pages. The bank's physical addresses and the account numbers. He hands the documents to the lady. The lady reads it over, realizing that nothing changed except the bank's name. She goes flush white, then she goes beet red. Embarrassed, I assume, she shows the documents to the 3 men, and then she starts to shoo the men off, waving the documents. After looking at my mom's still scowl, SW hides her face with the same document and folder. 20 minutes go by as my parents stare at each other with a "what the heck happened?" look. Another social worker walks in and tells my parents they are excused. No apology, nothing. My parents walk out. A few days later, they get a letter letting them know their social worker had been changed. Sometimes Karen mode does come in handy, but use it seldom. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripestories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you again tomorrow.